The PlayStation 3 was an interesting generation. Sony was a tad too high on their success from the PlayStation and PlayStation 2. When it came to the PlayStation 3, it would be their ultimate wake-up call. It had a rough launch, releasing a year after the Xbox 360. It was very expensive to purchase at the time. Developers had difficulty developing games for the console, and in those first couple of years, games suffered because of this. It wasn't until a 2009 rebranding with the launch of a slim version where the PlayStation 3 found success. At an affordable price with an aggressive marketing campaign, the PlayStation 3 saw an increase in sales. Its library games were getting better, looked better, and its first-party output was killing it. Games like Uncharted 2, Among Thieves, Little Big Planet 2, and Heavy Rain had people talking and gave the console some variety. With the PlayStation 4 hitting stores that November, Sony really gave everything for the PlayStation 3's big final year in 2013. There was something for everyone to play. From heavy hitters to surprise hits and underrated gems, this was the console at the top of its game. Despite the early struggle, the PlayStation 3 made an incredible comeback. That final year packed one giant punch, all starting with the return of a beloved icon. When original developer Sucker Punch made Sly 3 Honor Among Thieves, the game nicely wrapped up the trilogy and the overall story. For Sucker Punch, this was the end of Sly Cooper, and they would move on to the infamous series. However, there was always demand for a fourth game. Years later, Sony released Sly Cooper Thieves in Time on both the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Vita. The games feature cross-play progression. You can play the game on the PlayStation 3, send your save data onto the Vita, continue from there, and later send it back to the PS3. Thieves in Time picks up some time after the previous game and brings Sly back into the action with his gang. With this being the first original Sly game on the PlayStation 3, Sanzaru Games really took advantage of the new hardware. Everything about a Sly Cooper game is here. Gadgets, collectibles, minigames, stealth, levels are bigger than ever with so much to explore. Not only are Sly and the gang playable, now each map includes one of Sly's ancestors to play as. While great to have Sly Cooper back again after so long, its secret ending will leave the game on a huge cliffhanger, one that still hasn't resolved to this day and likely never will. 2013 was no different for PlayStation's annual baseball game. MLB The Show 13 was released on both the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation Vita. If you had a Move controller, you could use that on the PS3. This year's cover had Pittsburgh Pirates outfielder Andrew McCutchen, but if you lived in Canada, that cover featured Toronto Blue Jays outfielder Jose Bautista. MLB The Show 13 Home Run Derby was released exclusively on the PlayStation 3's store. This $6 game takes the popular game mode and spins it off into a digital-only game. It has 46 long ball hitters to pick from, and really, that's about it. God of War Ascension was yet another prequel story for Kratos. Only this time, it's at the start of the whole timeline. While a well-crafted game, Ascension feels very unneeded. It feels like a cash grab simply made to include a multiplayer mode because every game at that point pretty much had to have some kind of online component. Compared to previous God of War games, Ascension feels like the most welcoming and the easiest to play. But being released after the massive finale that was God of War 3 probably does more of an injustice than anything. By that point, God of War was getting stale and overwhelming with too many prequels, and it wouldn't be until 2018 when we would see the return of Kratos with a soft reboot, moving the series into Norse mythology. That doesn't mean Ascension is bad. Its graphics are stunning, the environments are beautiful, it's pretty much everything you expect in a God of War game, with a few new additions like new magical abilities and a redesigned combat system. Multiplayer was brand new for the series. Up to 8 players work together or against one another in 5 different modes. Players create their own character and align themselves to a Greek deity. Each deity has a different attack style. Even today, the servers are still active, but with very few playing. God of War Ascension wouldn't make waves as previous God of War games did. It had lower sales, critics found it less compelling than previous entries, and as I said, the series would be dormant until its reinvention. Up until this point, Naughty Dog typically worked on one franchise per console. Crash Bandicoot on PlayStation, Jak and Daxter on PlayStation 2, and then Uncharted for the PlayStation 3. But this all changed with one of the biggest releases to ever hit the PlayStation 3. Around the time of release, The Walking Dead and zombie phenomenon was probably at the height of its popularity. Unlike any typical zombie flick, The Last of Us stood out thanks to the emotional journey of Joel and Ellie as they traveled across the country. What should have been a simple job for Joel turns into one of personal growth as the two form a father-daughter relationship. Crafting items, upgrading weapons, and sneaking around, The Last of Us teaches us to strategize rather than attacking head-on. Clickers are not the only real threat. Rival factions are also dangerous, and in this world, no one is ever truly safe. The PlayStation 3 was about to be on its way out, but this was the game that made so many people buy a PS3. The Last of Us made an impact and is still very loved today. Puppeteer is one of the greatest games Japan Studio ever made on the PlayStation 3. It's also Shuhei Yoshida's biggest regret. Because the game was released so close to the PlayStation 4's launch, so many overlooked this hidden gem. Mix that with very low promotion and Puppeteer was swept under the rug. This 2D side-scrolling game is set up like a stage play. Every world you travel to changes drastically, from Halloween to Christmas, Asian and Spanish inspired. Each world has new obstacles to overcome and new heads to unlock. Each head allows for the use of different abilities, accessing new areas to level you could never unlock otherwise. Puppeteer is always changing, and you never know what surprises are coming next. There's so much enjoyment and wit in this game, the characters are full of charming ridiculousness, and is a completely unforgettable experience. If there's one game you need to check out on the PlayStation 3, Puppeteer is that game. Rain is another hidden gem from Japan Studio. This small digital-only title is exclusive to the PlayStation 3 store. Rain tells the story of a young boy in search of a young girl on a rainy night. The only catch is both are invisible, as are the creatures that lurk around them. Traveling through a beautiful Parisian-inspired town, the boy must solve puzzles and complete tasks to progress. When in the rain, the boy and the creatures can be seen, but in areas blocked off from the rain, everyone is completely invisible. This requires patience and some stealth to proceed. There is no combat, so typically the boy will have to outrun or hide to avoid getting attacked. Rain is certainly worth that first playthrough, but there's little to bring you back outside of trophies. Quantic Dream and Sony struck gold when it came to Heavy Rain, a mature game where your choices directly impacted the story. Characters could live or die, and the story would continue on no matter what happened, resulting in multiple endings. But the follow-up, Beyond Two Souls, isn't quite the game we were all looking for. It has similar mechanics to Heavy Rain, but lacks everything else. Gameplay isn't as interactive, there's only one character and very few endings. But when Beyond Two Souls isn't compared to Heavy Rain, it's a really interesting game. The story follows Jodie Holmes at various points in her life, from a young girl to a mature woman. What makes Jodie special is her connection to an unknown entity that can help her through different situations. The game experiments with different genres, like horror and supernatural elements, stealth, infiltration, and action. Each genre reflects different story points in Jodie's life, and Jodie certainly goes through many ups and downs in the game. Wonderbook was an extremely short-lived but innovative augmented reality gimmick that required use of the PlayStation Move. One of its biggest selling points was the involvement of J.K. Rowling for new stories set within the Harry Potter universe. 2012 saw the release of Book of Spells, but 2013 would see the final 3 Wonderbook releases, a sequel called Book of Potions, Walking with Dinosaurs, and Diggs Nightcrawler. There was so much Ratchet & Clank to play on the PlayStation 3, from heavy hitters to experimental titles and HD releases of its PlayStation 2 games. But to finish off their run on the console, there was Ratchet & Clank Into the Nexus. This acted as an epilogue to the future saga. After a couple of titles that tried something different, it was nice to see the series return to a more traditional style. The game was shorter in length and released at a cheaper price. Like any of these games, there are returning weapons and brand new weapons to use. Ratchet has access to a jetpack on certain levels. He can also use his new hover boost to quickly get around. One of the new major gameplay additions is gravity manipulation. Clank once again has his own levels. Players guide him through 2D mazes while manipulating gravity and outrunning an enemy to reach the end goal. Though its story is short, it's one of the more emotional tales in the series with the death of certain characters. But what's best is the return of many absent characters like Ratchet's girlfriend Talwyn. Into the Nexus would be the last original Ratchet & Clank game we would have for a long while. We wouldn't get a proper sequel until Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart on the PlayStation 5. Gran Turismo 6 is one of the oddest releases of that year. Instead of being a launch title for the PlayStation 4 or a cross-generation title for the two consoles, Sony decided to release the 6th entry that December strictly on the PlayStation 3. Regardless, the game was still successful on the console, becoming the 7th best-selling game on the PlayStation Store in 2015. With over 1,200 cars in its lineup, 40 locations with 107 layouts, a career mode, and other various modes returning from Gran Turismo 5, Gran Turismo 6 has a lot of content to get through. New game modes, new tracks, and new cars would be added through free updates. Players could also download an app called the GT6 Track Path Editor to create and modify tracks and import them into the main game. But this app, all DLC, the game itself, and its online functions were all shut down in 2018. The game also included microtransactions to get in-game credits faster, something we still see in Gran Turismo games, especially Gran Turismo 7. Gran Turismo 6 is typically mixed among fans of the series. Some love it, some hate it, but everyone agrees that releasing the game only on the PlayStation 3 was a weird choice. The PlayStation 3 really went out on an extreme high. Even with the PlayStation 4 on the horizon, we saw Ratchet and Clank, Sly Cooper, God of War, and Gran Turismo all returning. Naughty Dog changed everything with The Last of Us, and then we had some hidden gems like Puppeteer and Rain. The PlayStation 3 would continue to get first-party support from Sony after the release of the PlayStation 4 in the couple years that followed, one of the biggest titles being Little Big Planet 3, which also released on the PS4. But majority of these games were digital only, released alongside the PS4 and Vita like Helldivers, Entwined, and Counter-Spy. Let me know down in the comments, what were your favorite games of the PlayStation 3's swan song year? Check out this previous video where I go over the final big year of the PlayStation 4 before the PlayStation 5 comes out. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe for future content. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.